El Paso, welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where our mission is to share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz and I teach philosophy at El Paso Community College.
And my name is Dr. Jules Simon and I'm a philosopher and teach philosophy at the University of Texas, El Paso.
Thank you so much for joining us again today. This season we are exploring las fronteras between philosophy and other disciplines. And today we feel very grateful to be interviewing Ms. Judy Gutierrez, who is currently running for Precinct 2 County Commissioner in El Paso. As such, our philosophical frontera today is between philosophy and politics. Judy Gutierrez graduated with honors from EPCC and her degree is in business, accounting, and economics. She was born and raised in District 2 of El Paso, the area she is seeking to represent and support. For 15 years, Judy was the chief of staff and directly worked for 4 city representatives in the District 2 office. She has worked with the last 5 mayors in office. Judy assisted in leading the clinic creation and patient program set up for the first kidney transplant program in El Paso. She also assisted in overhauling the nursing budgetary process to oversee annual fiscal and capital budget operations. From an interview with the El Paso Times, Judy states, as president of Sun Up Optimist Club, 5 Points Business Association, and board member of both El Paso Sheriff's Advisory Committee and Central Regional Command Advisory Committee, there are multiple instances where one must learn to take the lead or to step aside and let someone else lead. Leadership is knowing when to do that, as well as when to listen and when to speak up. Thank you for joining us today. That last thing, this is a dialogue.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to join you and to give my perspective. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're most welcome. We're honored to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, and I'll start the ball rolling by asking our first question. The first question is, what is politics? But I'm going to add a little bit to it. So what do you understand politics to be, and how is that connected to the role of, say, commissioner?
So I think that politics is something that we do on a daily basis. And I think it's something that we start doing at a very young age, especially as children, where you try to negotiate with your parents, can I stay up a little longer? So politics for me is using dialogue to engage another person to try to reach a consensus, right? Something that's going to work for both parties. And so politics, I think, starts with us at a very young age. As we get older, we refine those skills in our teen years and then in our adult years. We use politics in our workplaces. We use politics in school, and so at every stage in our life, we probably unknowingly we're engaging in the art of politics, where it connects to what I'm doing now, or what my whole professional life has been, is, most people would probably equate politics to a campaign or elections, and it's a lot more than that, because it involves, again, coming to a consensus that is going to benefit not just one person or two, but an entire community, a constituency. And so when you talk about and you look at politics, there's always going to be conflict in politics. I think that's part of human nature. And when you engage in politics at any level, whether it's at a municipal level with city council, commissioner's court, or even at the federal level at our congressional and senate levels, which I think most people agree is very dysfunctional, you use everything that you've learned from a very young age to try to come to a consensus, to engage in dialogue that is going to be beneficial to a massive majority of your constituency. With Commissioner's Court and how politics ties into Commissioner's Court, my role or my hope, if I get elected to Commissioner's Court, is to use a lot of what I've learned in school, what I've learned growing up, and a lot of that ties into, you know, the philosophy, the ethics, your ideologies, ties into what kind of politics you want to engage in and how you're going to use that to lead that constituency. And so I you know.
That's how it ties in.
Yeah, that's how it ties
Go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering, you know, for our public, because I agree with you that it's something that we're doing even if we're not aware of it. We're always negotiating, you know, whether it's with our parents or teachers or siblings, right? Why is studying politics useful?
We learn in our very basic classes in high school about our national politics. What do we learn? The presidency, we learned that we have a bicameral system, but you know, when people go to the polls, when people go to vote, a lot of times it's a popularity contest. It's who do you identify with the most, or you know, who is more personable, who has more charisma. We have a lot of people who are very one-issue voters, and so regardless of what that one issue is, the voters are going to go to that candidate. And it's not fair in a whole to the process, because if a voter would take the time to truly understand politics and democracy from the ground up, you would understand, or I hope that they would understand, that there's so many pieces involved in it. And so while yes, you may identify with this candidate the most, you've got to look at the bigger picture, because we've seen that throughout all these elections. You're very focused on, I'm going to vote for this candidate because I think this is what we need, and then you vote for that person, they get elected, and within a month, within 2 months, within weeks, it's like, what did I do? And so if you understood the process better, if you understood the ramifications of what happens from the bottom up, I think that we're definitely a constituency that needs to be more educated at every level of our democratic process. Again, from our school boards, which is, you know, presumably the very first level of our government, and then city council, commissioners court, state representatives, and so on. And so I think it's something, I can tell you, when I was going to school, there was a lot that I learned in my history classes and in my political classes that I wasn't aware of. And I've lived that working at city council for years and years, and so it helped me to understand better our political process at the national level, you know, and everything trickles down from our federal government down. And so I think it's fundamentally a necessity for students to learn that, not even at our college level, down to maybe first grade, second grade, when we would do mock elections, and really just get into more, because I think as the years, we're in a society now where it's really important to understand the total picture of what our democratic process is about and our elections are about, because elections have consequences. And I think that's what the constituency, for the most part, doesn't really grasp.
The third question's a little technical. It has to do with a reference to Aristotle and a claim that Aristotle made, that Aristotle's a philosopher from thousands of years ago, and he said, we humans are political animals. Mm-hmm. What it means to be human is to be a political animal. But I'm listening to you, and I read a little bit of your background, and it seems to me that what you're describing is the politics that you're interested in promoting, the political sort of activity you're interested in promoting, is kind of like an engaged politics from the lived world experience of the people in your district.
Absolutely.
Right? The people in your precinct, rather, right? Right. And so are you someone I could turn to, say, if you were my commissioner, to ask, why are the streets people not coming by to fill the potholes?
No. The short answer is no, and the reason for that is because there are duties. There's a separation of duties between your city representative and your county commissioner. Now,
Okay.
If you lived within the county area, then definitely that is something that falls within the purview of the county commissioner.
I see.
But let me go back to the actual question of Aristotle calling us
Political animals.
Political animals. Do I agree with that? Yes, actually I do. I think that again, we're talking about layers and levels. We're social. We're from thousands of years back. It's our human nature. It's our behavior. We're very social. How do we, as a group, as a community, as a city, get anything done? How do we thrive when you don't have that hierarchy of an electorate that you can go to for these types of issues? And so what and I think you did hit it, you pegged that correctly, is that, so my career has always been engaging the public with whatever they need and helping them. And so I'm very much a people person, and I've in the 24 years that I've been there, from when I worked at 911, my core has always been helping people. Even prior to that, when I worked at the transplant clinic, it has always been to help people, to assist people. In this capacity, it's politics, representation should always be about having that connection to whoever your representative is, your commissioner, your state representative. You should have that ability, no matter what, to be able to contact and have an answer. So circling back to that, one of the things that I want to bring to this Commissioner's Court, if elected, is that when somebody calls and says, oh, my street light is out, or I have a pothole that needs to be addressed, I know full well, my staff will know full well, that's really a purview of the city council. Well, we're not going to pass the buck, because my experience, I know what to do, I know how to direct it, and so we're not going to give you the runaround. We're going to be able to take care of you, or take care of your request and route it so that you're not going to have to make another phone call or send another email, because it's really about being responsive to you, regardless of where you live. Even if you were to live in a different precinct, or you're from out of town and you're calling on behalf of your parents or a family member, we need to be responsive to the people. I will be responsive.
Yeah.
Oh, can I follow up though? Can I follow up on this one? So the streets people did come and fill in the pothole, by the way.
Good.
But I'm trying to figure out what does the commissioner do in terms of politics, and how you can bring your strengths of engagement to that. Okay. You're engaged on that kind of level.
Right.
Let me ask this question. So it is the case that the street lamp in our street is out, but I don't want it turned back on.
It's a safety issue.
I know. Well, is there some way that you would be part of that kind of decision making, the safety issue, or the budgetary process behind that, or something like that?
Okay, so let me tell you.
For me, it's an aesthetic issue.
Okay.
Because I think there's too much light in the city.
Okay. We do have a dark sky ordinance that people are in the city and the county are supposed to comply with. I can't tell you with certainty that we're not guilty of violating that ordinance. So the Commissioner's Court and the duties of that versus a city representative are night and day. First of all, there's only 4 county commissioners versus 8 city representatives. And there's 3 primary functions that the Commissioner's Court are supposed to serve. Number 1 is the court system, the jails, public safety. But throughout the many years, every administration has added more and more responsibilities and duties to their portfolio, if you will. Part of me feels that it's to justify the very inflated salaries that Commissioner's Court gets, but they now have their hand in so many different things. But that is our core responsibility, is the jails, public safety, our court system.
Okay.
So that's our main function. Now, because our jurisdiction falls within the outskirts of the city, again from Tornillo all the way to Anthony, Texas, to the state line, there are needs out in the counties out in the county that we don't have within the city. So we have a lot of drainage issues, a lot of roads that are unpaved, again, because of the county that has been neglected, for the last 50 years. And so my role as a county commissioner is going to be to support the commissioners in both those areas because the need is there. And even though that's not my constituency, my role is going to be to support my colleagues with whatever grant funding or whatever budgetary needs are there. Now, going back to your streetlight issue, my primary platform has always been public safety. It's a big thing for me. And so even though it's an aesthetics issue for you, it is a safety issue in general for the neighborhood. And you're going to have little shenanigans when it's much darker, and as it is, we've seen our crime rates go up throughout the city, throughout the county. And so budget-wise, my pledge has been to always support our sheriff and jail budgets. I'm opposed to reducing or defunding or reallocating from that sheriff's budget. But public safety for me is going to be paramount because nothing else, I believe, in our society is going to matter if we have chaos and if we don't have safe communities. And we've been safe for many, many years, not just as a city, but as a county as a whole, because of community policing, because of measures put in place by our chief of police, by our sheriff. And then, we're a very strong military community, so we have a lot of Fort Bliss people, we have retired military here, we have DPS, Border Patrol. So I think that adds so many layers to us being a safe community. But yeah, aesthetics, I don't know that I would give into that at the cost of, hopefully reducing crime if it means turning on a street light. I wouldn't even pay for that out of pocket, actually, because it's very cost effective to put in street lights or to repair street lights.
Yeah. A colleague of mine wrote an article, the tendency of cities to put in more street lights and to brighten up the cities. And the article basically argues, so this is in a journal issue that I published, and it was an article on lighting up our cities and how dangerous it was actually to the psychological health of people when you have too much light in your lifetime all the time. So you don't have, what you do is you change the natural rhythms of human beings because of the artificial light.
But it's one thing for another, because then if the kids come in and tag your house, the side of your house.
Which has happened to the house we live in, right?
It has happened to us.
No, it has happened, I know, but the tendency is to go overboard in the other direction to create artificial environments that humans aren't meant to live in.
And I think that is why with the ordinance that the city council passed maybe 5 or 6 years ago, was they passed the dark sky ordinance, and I think that was part of their justification.
It's a health issue, actually. It's not just aesthetics.
Right. Well, okay, I will concede to that. But yes, I do.
Okay, so we're already practicing politics.
See that, right?
And
we're coming to an agreement. We're coming to consensus.
And I want to follow up with this next question. So the question is, if there is such a thing as human nature, would it be a good idea for a politician or a political scientist to know something about it? So typically, there is, there tends to be like one or the other, right? There's like three. There is no human nature. There is human nature and humans are good. Who would say that? Like Rousseau would say that humans are good.
Mencius.
In the Chinese tradition. And then you have Thomas Hobbes, who would say, no, humans are really selfish by nature, Or others like Aristotle, who would say humans are social. So there are these, characteristics about human nature. And then you have people like the existentialists who say, no, there isn't such a thing as human nature. We create it. But anyway, so with, I'll just leave it open. What do you think? If there is such a thing as human nature, would it be a good idea for a politician to know something about it?
So I do think that I do believe that we have to some degrees human nature, but I also believe that much of our human nature is learned. Again, from the time that we're born. We're taught yes, no, good, bad. And so that stays with us as we go into our youth, to our teen, to our adulthood. But I also believe that we are also born with some inherent traits, the need to feel safe, the need to be loved. So there are some feelings or some situations where human nature really stands out. How does it tie into a politician having that or understanding that? I think it's all about human nature, because political decisions, political votes at every level, again, from school board up to our presidency, is made on the reactions from your constituency, and it's all based on our human nature. Do I think that some politicians disregard that? Yes, and I think that a lot of politicians at every level use their own intuition, their own philosophies, their beliefs to vote the way they're going to vote, and they don't pay attention to the constituency. And so I think it's really important for any elected official, again, at every level, that that human nature does play into it. And I think we've seen that being played out at our state level with our governor putting in 2 laws that have affected thousands of people. First, banning the abortions after 6 weeks, and then making medical care for transgender children illegal. And so again, it's and I'm not saying the governor is right or wrong, but he's enacted these laws. It is his belief, that's something that he grew up with. I think it's part of the faith, his faith. But it has affected many, and I'm not even going to say voters. It has affected many people throughout the state. And there are ramifications for that. And so one of the things that I've talked about, and because I've been asked this question before, is, what do you do? How do you handle that? And there always has to be that dialogue. He is our state's top elected official. He, through that executive order, he enacted that. And now we have a young girl, Ms. Herrera, who was jailed for a self-induced abortion. And so these are the ramifications of that, to me, that tunnel vision where your personal beliefs and ideologies aren't aligning with your constituency. And I think that if that dialogue was there on every side, Republican, Democrat, liberal, whatever, that there might have been some better consensus. And I think that's very important, because in our positions as elected officials, it's not your way. It's not what you think is best. It's coming to, again, that dialogue to come to a consensus to what is going to best serve the community as a whole. And our human nature, we saw that also on January 6th a couple of years ago. And so it plays on both sides, the good, the bad. But I think most politicians, we're all at some level politicians, right, to get what we want. That human nature has to be part of your thought process, of your vetting process as to how you're going to get here. Because at the end of the day, we have millions of different ideas that are tied into our human nature. And how do you bring all of that to make your final decision that's going to affect thousands, if not millions, of people in your area? So it's to me, it's important, it's valid. I think that it has to be taken into account, and I think it would serve any political person in office well if they took that into account.
Yeah, I want to say no. This time I'm not going to let you.
The complicated questions come up because of what our wonderful
their dialogue.
Guest is raising as issues.
The dialogue and the tension, right? So in one of our previous episodes, Dr. Gregory Papas, we talked precisely about this, about dialogue, and part of his research is very much the stuff that you keep telling us, from the ground up, not just theoretical, but from the ground up. And then also one of the phrases that came up is mandar sirviendo, which is to serve. You command by serving. You're in this position of authority, but really you're there to serve, not to impose your will.
Right.
And this is, I'm just putting a plug for that episode. In everything that you're saying.
But to tie this into what Judy was saying about the executive orders given by Governor Abbott and how that conflicts with the health and safety of the residents of Texas, right? So just because something's something's being executed on a political level doesn't make it the right thing to do. And we'll get to ethics later perhaps, but now maybe it's the right time, because you're the one who brought up the coat hanger abortion, right?
No, but let's ask the next question, which is, what is ideology? What is ideology? Because it seems like you've pointed to it, right, where some of us have ideologies and that's what we're gonna push. So what is, because it's one of those words that gets used and abused and misused, what would you say is ideology?
Well, I think ideology, again, it's all learned behavior, because we're not born with a set of ideals, a set of principles, or your values. It's something that you've learned from your parents, your caretakers, your family. In school, we learn a little bit more ideology from our teachers. And then when we go to work, we learn a different set of ideologies from our employers, and then in school. Because until I took your ethics class, I didn't really, that critical thinking, I didn't use it as I should have. And so throughout every stage in life, from the time we're young, we're setting up what our ideologies are. But then life happens, right? Situations happen, circumstances happen, and something will happen that will shatter that ideology in your head, and all of a sudden you no longer have that strong tie to that. And so politicians, I think I'm going to tie that back to what we're doing, is many politicians, and I think myself included, we're going to use that ideology to help guide us as a compass, a moral compass, as you will. And unfortunately, many of our politicians vote on what is popular, vote on what is going to get them elected, not on doing the right thing. And I think that's part of, and I think that's being seen at the state level. It's certainly being seen at the federal level. Our ideologies, I think, with politics, oftentimes is very conflicting, because you have to wrestle. Like, let's just use, because I did bring it up, let's use the abortion. Are you pro-life? Are you pro-choice? And that personal belief, when you're in a situation where you have to vote, let's say for funding, or to make abortions illegal, your personal belief, it's at the core of you, but is that what is best for the constituency? Is that doing the right thing? Because again, as elections have consequences, your votes have consequences, and it's going to trickle far and wide, as we've started to see. And so I think our personal ideologies are good. It's our moral compass. It's what keeps us as a society thriving and moving forward. But at a political, it's a totally different animal when you're talking about politics and how your personal ideology comes into play with your votes.
Do you think that all politicians are ideological?
I think it would be great if they were, but then again, which side are you on? Are you on this side where all life matters no matter what, and so you're going to vote, and that's their strong ideology? Or are you on this side where you're going to say, Yes, I believe all life matters, but there has to be exceptions. There has to be, there is a no all or none answer. It's not always black or white. There's got to be some gray in the middle. So it's a double-edged sword. Ideology can work on both ends of the spectrum. It just depends on you as a constituent how you feel about that. I think it's good that we all don't share the same ideology because where we would be a society of
there wouldn't
robots.
be any dialogue.
Right. But again, ideologies are very different. They run the gamut from one end to the other, and I think we can all agree. There are some things like not to murder. I mean, do you support the death penalty, etc. So, I think we're all ideological in our own ways, but fortunately there's only a handful of us that are going to use that to vote that is going to affect our constituency. But it'd be great to say where all politicians are fit that, but then, which side of that spectrum are you on?
Well, I think the problem with the ideology issue is that an ideology can color one's whole life. Right? And if you're not being aware or able to be aware or self-critical of these kinds of influences and forces that you've grown up with, right? For me, that makes the worst kind of politician, because a politician has to serve a constituency. And the constituency is made up of
a
plurality of people, right? So once you have that factual condition in place, the politician has to serve, to come back to what Kim was saying, right? Has to serve the constituency. But I want to come back to the issue again that you brought up, because it has to do with, maybe it has to do with being a commissioner, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But if somebody ends up in jail for doing a self-induced abortion, that seems to be your province then, right?
Yes,
right?
yes.
So,
to a certain degree, because we certainly don't tell judges how to judge,
Right.
how to impose sentences, how to execute. That's not our role. I think that's a good tie-in, because as a commissioner, we're not going to be in a position where we have to decide anything like that, or support or not support our judges or our law enforcement that is going to have to execute that arrest. What I would like to say is, when it comes to those type of issues, number one, because I'm female, and number two, I support our county attorney. Our county attorney has been one of the ones that has been very vocal, saying that she will not execute Governor Abbott's order to charge parents with child abuse. And again, I'm the law enforcement candidate. I believe in the rules and the laws, but I'm not in that position to, like Ms. Bernal is. I've been exposed to so much child abuse when I've been out on patrol with police and with sheriff, and so I've seen the face of what real child abuse is. And so when you have Ms. Bernal who says, I'm not going to follow the orders, I support her. I'm not going to condemn her. I'm not going to judge her, because I think in that role with the right to the care, the mental care, the social services for these children who are trying to receive the transition care, to withhold that, or we're not just physically harming them, we're emotionally and mentally harming them. And I think in the long run, that's going to be more damaging than anything. So I support Ms. Bernal in that. There are some laws, and I think that's one of the questions is, what is the role of law? There's always going to be that room where, like these two, for instances, that we're going to agree with or disagree with. And these are two instances where I'm going to support the individual and the actual cause, because It's just, one, as I'm not a mother, but as a parent, I think a lot of parents are going to be out there wanting the best for their child, and you can't blame them for that. And then as a woman, there's a right to health care, and you choosing to do what is best for you, and there's no room for anybody else to judge you on that. And I think they've brought in politics into that, and I really fundamentally disagree with that.
Mm-hmm. What is the latitude or leeway of a commissioner vis-a-vis the independence of, say, what goes on politically here in the city versus what's going on from Austin? Do you have some independence here, or do we have independence here? And can is the attorney right in saying that? And should the commissioners then be saying, no, we have a right to exercise our independence or something like that?
And I went to also under the umbrella of the question, what is democracy? Because, and the wheels were turning as he was asking the question, because it goes back to, Judy, what you were saying, and also with ethics, that laws are not necessarily ethical. They may be laws, but they may not be ethical. They are political, and they may be enacted for political reasons. So
that is for the interest of some subgroup, right? And that's what I think you mean, right?
Right.
So in politics, when we're talking about divisions of ideologies, you get groups who generate more interest for whatever reason. It could be, dissatisfaction.
It's usually economic.
And a lot of times it's economic.
It always comes down back to the Benjamins, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's in that case, our elected officials aren't always necessarily representing the entire populace, right? They're representing, say, the most vocal, or the ones who raise the most money. But there's a larger group, right? And that we can distinguish, right? They're all residents. We're all citizens, right?
Correct.
So interests turn out to be the point of conflict here. These strong interests that some people have vis-a-vis others. So, but to come back to that, the democratic question, in El Paso, what role do the commissioners play, or do they play any role that has any kind of independent political function from
so a lot of what happens
the state level?
With commissioners, I had mentioned earlier that there's a lot of other things that they are now responsible for and what they have to do. And part of that actually comes from the state level. So we have 5 state representatives and 1 state senator that represents us in Austin. And a lot of times the legislature, we're a Republican-led legislature, and a lot of times what will happen out of session is that they will mandate certain projects, certain things that the county needs to execute, but they don't fund us. So they're called unfunded mandates. And we as the county have no choice but to execute what the state has dictated to the commissioners to do. So in that sense, there really is no independence, because, and it's not really at the city level, it's mostly at the county level. So our state legislature, every 2 years, they're in session every other year, they will come back to the county and say, here's a list of unfunded mandates that the county needs to carry out. And then the county needs to figure out how we're going to fund it.
Right.
And that ties into possible tax increases or decreases of services. When it comes from the state, there is very little independence from the state. But I can tell you that with the 5 state reps, the city and the county really work well together, because the city has needs and issues, as does the county. And so, every other year they work with our legislature to try and get certain things passed at the state level. We're not as successful, again, because the majority of our electorate here is mostly Democratic, and when you're going up against a very strong Republican-controlled legislature, it's difficult to come to a consensus. But I do think that while I disagree with Governor Abbott's orders, I would be at that table with him every time, talking and talking and talking, and trying to reach, even if it's going to be futile, you still engage and you do everything you can, because you have to give it everything you can to say, I did everything I could. It still came down to, that signature. But that dialogue needs to continue no matter what. You're going up against a wall, I think, on a lot of these issues, and our county commissioners and our city reps, they have no choice but to, whenever those orders come down, they have to follow through. So there is very little.
Why do we keep talking to each other, Judy? Even though some of us have such hardened positions.
Because I think there's always that hope. At least for me, I believe there's that hope. Just like, what we start at the beginning, you have your ideologies, you're never going to change my mind about X, Y, Z. And then a circumstance will happen, or, after continued dialogue, that you may have that breakthrough where you'll say, wow, I never thought of that. Or, I think it's caused me to re-examine what I have thought or what I have believed. I don't think it's impossible. I think that person just has to have that open mindset. I think all of us say we're open-minded, but I don't really think that we are. I think that we're very set in our ways, and that's fine when you're just, a regular human being out there. But when you're out there and whatever you're thinking, feeling, voting on is going to affect a large group of people, that open-mindedness has to happen. It has to be there. It can't just be all talk. And so I am a firm believer in you'll talk until you're blue in the face, but you've got to give it your all and continue to talk, because maybe you're going to wear down maybe you're going to wear down Governor Abbott, and maybe a miracle will happen. He's like, okay, and maybe there'll be a little, and so you start to chip away at that exterior, and maybe eventually we'll have a win.
Well, earlier you mentioned sometimes life happens, right? We have our beliefs and then life happens. And I've been there, I don't know about you, Jules, but I'm like, I'm sure it's happened to you too, where I held a belief and then I would say, like, how can people believe this, right? And then, with life's ups and downs, then I'm like, okay, now I see why they believe what they believe and why they do what they do. And I think establishing that dialogue sometimes allows us to still be in dialogue with each other as life happens, so that we can transcend that ideology and see each other as a person, beyond religion, beyond ideology, beyond politics. And
as humans,
right?
As
humans. And that, we have different beliefs, but sometimes we change what we believe. Sometimes we change politics, sometimes we change. And so if we stay in dialogue with each other over time, life happens. And that sometimes allows us to meet each other at a human level.
Right. That saying, walk a mile in my shoes, right? Mm-hmm. You don't know until you've been in that person's shoes what they've gone through, what life experiences they've gone through, and I think that changes, like you said, it does change, but that dialogue, no matter what, always has to happen, and I think the last administration really brought that to the forefront, that we were set in our ways, and this side and this side, there was no dialogue, there was nothing, and I think it just set us back. And there was really just so much not even negativity, just toxic conversations, toxic behaviors and actions, and
there was no dialogue.
What did that do? What do we get? And so we're now where we are now, and we have a lot to make up for that. But I think those brick walls serve no purpose at all. And so I'm very much a huge proponent of, you just continue to talk. Once, twice, 3 times, and you're not going to reach consensus right away, but you continue that dialogue.
I work with the ideas of a philosopher named Hannah Arendt, she turned her back on philosophy because it became too much of an ivory tower sort of affair for her. And so she said, I'm a political thinker. You know, she's not a political scientist, but I'm a political thinker, right? And she had this theory about public space, and that public space is a political space. So public space is that space where we create areas, space to engage in political dialogue or speech. And she contended that this was the place where humans should get together to freely express their differences of opinion and attempt. She presupposed that people who enter this space are educated. It's not, I don't mean to say that you shouldn't keep talking until you're blue in the face, Judy, but the presupposition is that you enter this public space to engage with others who are free to talk, and then you have your argument, and then you test your arguments with each other, and you determine, you know, let's try this argument out. Let's try this pathway out. Once you've decide that this is a good way to go. I don't know if you're going to have that kind of space as a commissioner, but it would be a good thing to create one if you didn't.
I was going to say, you've just described City Council and Commissioner's Court.
Right.
And I think that's that space. And these are the people, like you said, the educated or the so-called educated, that are going to then go back and to their respective places and say, this is the consensus that we've come to. But that's in, you know, public space and the political space. I don't know that we're at a place now where you can tell the difference. I think anywhere you go now, public and politics are one and the same now. At least that's how I think. That's how I see it. It's how a lot of people see it. Because I think this is the society that we're in now. This is the pandemic. I think has brought that. And the pandemic, while it should have been a worldwide health issue, it ended up becoming a political issue.
Right.
And it shouldn't have. And at the cost of how many millions of lives. And so, yeah, I think to that, I don't think you can distinguish public space and the political space. I think
yeah, but I mean, if I'm engaged in a public dialogue, say, and someone proposes one of these quack theories about, about viruses and
bleach.
Yeah, and how to treat viruses, and they don't have any evidence for what they're talking about. Conspiracy theories are all part of this as well, right? I think that these are some of the parameters for how the public space should be, set up, as it were. That you enter the public space, but you have to enter with your argument in hand and the evidence that you have to support your argument. I mean, there has to be some rules, just like there's a rule of law, right? You have to have a rule for having these arguments that, have consequences,
right.
For maintaining dangerous positions that are health hazards to people.
And don't you think that would be great if we took the emotion out of it?
Yeah.
And if people just went in with facts. But most of what has come out is it's all emotional.
Yeah.
And it's not based on research or knowledge. It's just based off of our raw emotion.
Right. That's a really good point.
Yes. Well, and also it's more self-serving rather than what is in the best interest of all. And be open to, I could be wrong, and here's my idea, but I could be wrong, and if other people don't think it's a good idea, get out of the way.
Yeah, I think I can tell you, for me, that example played out school board meetings across the country as to, the masks were harming their children.
Mask mandates and things like that, right.
And I saw that, and it was purely, to me it was very emotional. And you have both sides. You have the mother who's trying to protect their child, who has no problem with the mask and wants, their child to be safe and their family. And then on the other side, you have the mother who's saying, continuing to wear the mask is damaging my child's brain. And so, you have both parents on each side wanting what's best for their child, but to me, it was mostly emotional. Very, very few science-backed arguments played out in a lot of these boardrooms.
Yeah, because in this case, it's a very good example about the mask mandates, and it did harm children. It harmed a generation now of children for years. But I think what was lost in that was that the most important part was the socialization that kids get, right? And you can socialize with a mask on. You can socialize with a mask on. That's just the case, and kids are really adaptable.
Well, look at us as adults. The mental health crisis, we focus a lot on the kids, obviously, because that's our priority.
Right.
But as adults, we suffered right along with them because our outlets, when you're tired of the kids, when you're tired of the husband or the wife, it's the girls' night out or guys' night out, or just, getting together for coffee, and that was taken away. So all across the board,
right.
Even as adults, it affected us. I think we're going to see that the effects for years to come, and what that's going to do to that young generation. I'm a little worried about what they're going to be faced with as they get into their teen years, because we, again, going back to Plato and us being social beings, 2 years or 18 months that we did that, and those are for a lot of them, those were the formative years. And so, it's going to be really interesting to see what that generation does in a few years.
And how we as public servants, right, how we can help them.
Right.
I want to come back to you as a public servant, and I wanted to ask you earlier, and I thought, I'm going to hold off on my question. How did you decide, I'm going to get into this, I'm going to start serving my community, I'm going to put myself out there?
That's a great question. What inspired you? I think so too.
Well, I can tell you that I have been serving my community before I ever thought of running for office. From the time I was fresh out of high school, being in the medical field, being a caretaker, and then serving on multiple boards. I serve my community, and I think for me the biggest and my proudest was being part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters, where I got a little girl, Leslie. She was 8, and I'm still mentoring her to this day. She's now 19, and I stayed with her. I was only with the program maybe 3 or 4 years, and then I inherited her brother, and then I inherited the new baby, and then I inherited the mom. So I've mentored all of them, and that has been, to me, that's how you serve your community. Being a public servant, for me, is not serving your community. That's, I think that it's 2 different servitudes, if you will. But what inspired me to actually run for office, my philosophical difference with the current person in office on the vision for El Paso. To me, it makes a difference if you're born and raised here, because again, in my very short 50-something years, I've seen the progress and the lack of progress in many areas of our city. And so it's not something I read in a book or saw on archived videos. I lived through it, and I think that makes a big difference. So that's actually what inspired me to run, was that, and after serving as chief of staff for so many years and knowing that constituency and knowing the needs and actually being there, is, to me, was, you know, I'm doing this job, you just don't have the title or you don't have the authority to make some decisions. And it was a great race. I loved it. I learned a lot. The runoff, you know, I fell short by a couple hundred votes. And then for this race, what inspired me, and I hold that very near to my heart, is that it was a public safety issue. It was shortly after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd and the subsequent riots that happened throughout our country, and then the protest that we had here in El Paso that just really just became such a hotbed on both sides, on the protester side, on the law enforcement side, and then the rhetoric, the fallout rhetoric of defunding our law enforcement. I come from a family of law enforcement. My family suffered an on-duty death in PD, and so it's something I would never turn my back on. And so when all of that talk was, well, we need to take money from here and let's put it into more of these programs because I think this will help us better. No. I think we have a homeless issue. We have a huge mental health need, but it's not going to, for me, it could not come at a cost of our law enforcement budget. And so that is what inspired me to run, because again, for me, if we don't have a safe community, if we don't have a safe society, nothing else is going to matter. It doesn't matter if you have good parks and libraries and pools and all these quality of life issues. If you can't go out your front door, then what good is having all these things? So that's what inspired me. And then I lost my dad a couple years ago, and then I lost my mom last year. So it was like, okay, and they're both immigrants from Mexico, and we're a border city, and immigration is a very hot topic. And so I wanted to do right by them, and that's also one of the reasons why I'm running. And again, I've lived both sides. My parents were undocumented when they first came here, and after a few years, they tried to make a life and realized they couldn't as undocumented. You know, they were always looking over their shoulder, and so they went back to Mexico and then did it the right way. Went through the process, got the attorney, and it took them a couple of years, but then they came back. So I understand both sides of, to a small degree, both sides of that immigration issue, because I've lived it with my family. So that was the other reason.
It's almost time to go. Well, it's actually time to go, but do you want to say something else?
Oh, I just wanted to say I'm glad you've told me that you're not in charge of keeping track of streetlights, because maybe we can just forget that part.
One of the fathers of philosophy in the Western tradition is Socrates, and Socrates was so committed to Athens, right, that the Athenians in power told him, dude, you gotta shut up. You can't just be having this public conversations, you know. And he's like, no, but I love the people. This is my city. I would rather die than to be exiled, because I care so much, you know, if I don't do that, then I don't see the point. So anyway, this is this issue, you know, of philosophy and politics and people caring for the place where they grew up and the people that they love. So thank you so much for joining us today, Judy.
Thank you.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Please check out our YouTube videos and join us next time.